Alright, I've got my cake trimmed down, all carved up, ready to go, so I've got enough of a gap between the edge of the board and where the ganache will go. I've got my pre-made ganache, and that has set up quite firm, so you can see it will, it's still movable, but it's set. So to work with that, I grab little sections with a pastry scraper and just drop it in here. So what I'm going to do is crumb coat the cake first. And after crumb coating it, let it set for 20 minutes, and then you do a thicker coat over top of it, and then you skim coat that to get a really perfect sharp edge. It's not always necessary to do the final skim coat. Ooh, moths. Anyway, now I've got a little bit here, and this is just a little bit too thick to work with, so I'm going to have to, because that'll just tear up the cake, and this is a crumb coat, so it needs to go on quite thin. Pop that in the microwave for, I don't know, 10 seconds I'll try. 10 might be too long, but we'll find out. The nice thing is that if it is too long, I've got a whole tray full of set ganache that I can just pick up and work with. So, how did we go? Let's see. So that's 10 seconds. Yeah, 10 seconds was a little bit too long, but not too bad, because we need it to go on the cake but not droop. And I'm nearly there. And the nice thing about that is I can just grab some more of this set stuff, mix that through and get the right texture. This is also how you do a ganache drip. You just grab some of this, warm it up, and put it on a teaspoon and drip it down the cake, but you just need it to be a little bit thinner than that, and you just do that with a microwave. And getting there. Now what I'll do is just start at the top and work this down. Now this is the crumb coat. It is the dirty, messy coat, which is designed just to catch all the crumbs. It is certainly not the final coat, and the only purpose of this is to trap the crumbs and stop them from showing through the final coat. And just spreading that on, getting there, spreading. This is usually where I'm a little bit too miserly. Putting more on is usually a little bit better, just so that you're not dragging crumbs about the place. And I like these little palette knives. They're brilliant. They're just the right size for just about everything, and they're really cheap. So it's a good investment. Got a couple of them, and they go, I've always got a couple in my kit and a couple in my drawer, and I use them for just regular cooking as well. Nearly there. Now, again, this looks hideous, but the point of this is it's just a crumb coat. Its only purpose is to stop crumbs coming through the final coat. But you can also see the final colour's not too bad on that ganache. It's a bright and cheerful pink, but it's not too Barbie pink. I don't know if the camera's picking up the colour all right, but we're getting there. So here we go. And it is really quite warm in the house today, so this is, and it's very humid as well. So this is a little bit softer than it would usually be, and the cakes are a little bit warmer than I'd usually have them, because normally the ganache would start to set as I'm spreading it over the cake. But that's all right. And that's enough for a crumb coat. I'll just take a scraper and make sure that it's reasonably flat, so that my next layer sits nicer. And when I'm scraping this, I'm scraping on top of the card. I'm not scraping up next to the card, because I still want that clearance left. And here we go, getting there. I use a couple of different scrapers when I'm doing this. I don't really have a preference, but you don't even really need a scraper. You can do the whole thing with a palette knife, but scrapers do make life easier. If worse comes to worse and you can't get to a cake shop, get yourself a plastic school ruler and clean it up real good. Keep that in your cake kit, and then you can do 30 centimeter high cakes with that. It's a little bit narrow, but it works. Now, this is starting to set up nicely while it's on the cake. It's, like I said, it's taking longer than it usually does, but it's kind of nice that I'm able to get a little bit more of a surface going. Again, this is just a crumb coat. It's not really worth worrying about or spending a lot of time on. It's just to get your kind of underlying structure looking okay, so that when you put your final coat on, it'll be just that little bit easier and smoother to get everything sorted. We're getting there. I'll just push that over. And done. And I might be able to crack on and do the final coat, you know. This crumb coat has actually set while I've been working on it. Didn't think it would. You'd normally have to wait a bit longer, but my ganache is working for me. So what I'll do is, let's get rid of that chocolatey little bit, and I'll scrape out another chunk and we'll start prepping another bit of ganache. So it's always easier to work in smaller amounts as well. You can see how the stuff comes out of the tray. There we go. I've got reasonably good at guesstimating the amount of ganache that I'll need for a cake. I usually just hold up bars of chocolate around the cake, and that'll give me a pretty good indication. So that should be enough for my second coat, and then that little bit left there will be for my skim coat. We'll see how we go. I might need to add a bit more. Now, 10 seconds was too long last time, so I am going to just leave this for 7 seconds. Yeah, that'll do. Oh, went a little bit too far again, but that's okay. I've got set ganache that I can add to it. So, and then mix it around. Now, the ganache having set up completely first before you start ganaching with it just makes it a lot easier to work with, makes it less likely to split on you. Once your ganache is set, it's a little bit like working with a tempered chocolate. It's so much more stable and so much more resilient to various changes. All right. Now that is just about right. It's still maybe a little bit thin, but that'll make it easier. So I'll just pour that on. Now I know a lot of cake decorators do this in a different way, and that's fine, that's their choice. I do things in a way that just gets it done. Like, it's not necessarily the right way, it's not necessarily the wrong way, but it works for me. You do what works for you. And getting there. Lift that up. And spread that across. And just try and get that even. It's the other nice thing with the ganache and a single tier cake. You can sort of do a lot with ganache to level off a cake, or with icing in general to level off a cake. If it's just one tier, you don't have to be as precise. So let's get my trusty scraper. Now I'm on the board and I've got it at a 90-degree angle, and it's going around the cake. So if it's square onto the cake, it'll be taking chocolate off. So you can see it's taking chocolate off. If it's flat to the cake, it'll be spreading it around. So it's a way that you can move chocolate around your cake and get chocolate in areas where you need a little bit more chocolate, and areas where you need to take some off. So you can just spread that around. Again, this is super messy, but it works. And here we go. I'm starting to get some little patches, so you just add more to it. And the nice thing about this one not being a whipped ganache is that you don't tend to get the little pockets, the little air pockets that come up. Unfortunately, this does take a bit of time. Here we go, turning around and scrape the top. Yep, come around. And I keep leaning this in on an angle, so I really need to be a bit more careful there because I'm scraping some chocolate off an area that very desperately needs it. Go, come around, and the chocolate is starting to set up on the cake, and it will make it a bit easier just to go back in with the palette knife and fill those gaps. So just go back in with the palette knife, fill those gaps. Still got some in the bowl, which is good. Whoop. Now I've got some on the bench and on my fingers. Next I'll have it in my hair. But we're getting there. And go. And I have been just that little bit ever so miserly with it, a little bit too mean. Getting there. Just try and fill in all those gaps. Again, I tend to be pretty cheap and I make almost exactly the amount of ganache that I need to actually finish the final cake. And my aircon has just kicked in again, and I think it's actually helping to set the chocolate for me. So here we go, come around. Now, if you cross your arms, you can get a really nice final coat just in one finish. So you cross your arms and you get a smoother finish on the cake. It's too early to really be doing that, but at least it sort of makes it a bit easier. There's a few less really big sections there. And that one's just for Sue Ballard to show that I'm paying attention when she shows me things. She is one of my favourite presenters and an all-round awesome person. So just coming through. I've seen her present a lot of things at Cake Decorators Association events and meetings, and it's always very, very nice. So, getting there. I know I say getting there a lot when I'm doing these videos, but I am. So, come around and just crossing my arms as often as I can. And it's slowly getting cleaner. I will get to a point where I just need to stop faffing with it because it's not going to get any straighter. Here we go. And I'm just bringing the edges in with a scraper and go around the edge again and across. I can see where I'm starting to get some bumps. So to take it off, so I had a bit of a bump here, so to take it off I'm straight onto the cake and swipe around, and that'll take the excess off. And then there's a little section here where I need to smooth it in, so I go flat against the cake and it spreads it into the flat bit. So take it off the bump and spread it into the flat. And then go around. And this is just a few final scrapes, and yep, my room is actually working for me now. The aircon's kicked in and everything's setting up nicely. So I'm just going to center that again, cross my arms and swing that around and just cross through. I get a nice sharp finish and spread that way. There we go. Now I'm terrible at finishing the top of my cake, so I usually put a nice border around the edge, but it's not a big worry. So you can see there's kind of a stutter pattern there. That's what happens when you go in and scrape like that. You get these little stutters, so that's why the crossed arms is really nice for finishing off a stroke. Done. And just bring that back across here. You can hot knife these as well, so that's where you heat your scraper or your knives up in boiling hot water and just run it across the surface. This one I kind of don't really need to do that for. I've got a really nice finish there. Again, I'm directly under an air conditioner, so normally you would run this, especially if it's a super hot knife, you'd run this to the fridge and you'd let it set up for 20 minutes in the fridge. I'm working with quite a firm mixture, so it's kind of working for me. I'll just use the last of my chocolate, and that's not a huge amount of wastage considering, so I'm quite happy with that. I've got my mixture nearly right. So yeah, like I said, to calculate that, put blocks of chocolate around it and I'll work out, okay, so that chocolate will spread out a bit there, and yeah, I'll just heat this up to do a final skim coat and I will be back. So about 7 seconds. Sorry, this turned into a how to finish off the entire cake instead of just how to crumb coat, but it's fine. Whoa. There we go. And this is liquid, so this is the consistency that you'd use for a drip. So just make sure that comes together again, because that is splitting a bit, because I massively overheated it. But because it's already set up once, it comes together nicely again. And because there are chunks in there that aren't overheated, it all just recombines perfectly, which is handy. So just come together. Okay, so that's quite a nice texture. I don't want any lumps or bubbles in it, because I want that really crispy edge on it. And clean up my scraper. Clean up my scraper. Sorry, I'm just off in my own little world here, and this is, I've blown out the time limit, but this is kind of handy because I've shaved off 20 odd minutes of time, because it's, now my aircon's kicked in, I don't have to worry about things setting up too quickly. So if I wanted to turn this into a drip, I'd heat that up slightly more and it would drip down the side of the cake really quite nicely. It's always best to do that on a semi-frozen cake, so you just freeze the outside for a few minutes. Now this will give me that nicer top. So done. There we go. So there's a couple of things, like in cake decorating, there's a lot of tools that you really don't need. And one of them that will make your life easier is a really good turntable. You can get them fairly inexpensively, but a turntable that doesn't stutter, that can take a lot of weight, that does everything you need it to, is a good investment. And a good one will last you a lifetime. You can pass it down to your kids, pass it down to your grandkids. And I don't know, one of them might be a potter or a cake decorator, either way. It's all good. Scraping that top flat, get that edge, and scrape. So, getting there. Oh, and I've just taken too much off that. after all that. Gouged out the top. Okay. So this is the skim coat. This fills in any of those tiny little pock marks on the cake itself. I can run around the top with a razor blade if I really want to get that super crispy edge. I don't think I need to because that'll start to set up again. And I could probably have had this even hotter. You can see little spots like this here. That just gets a lick of that, that gets a lick of that. And anywhere else around the cake that is like that gets a little spot. And then run over it with your scraper again. And I'll use the other one this time, just because it's cleaner. It'll leave a nicer finish. Just run around the edge. So, and you can sort of see a little bit better what's going on with this one. So, you see I'm running a really thin layer of quite hot ganache. I say hot, it's quite melted ganache. It's probably more accurate. And around, and scrape that off, and around, and oh, it's just starting to slip. So again, around, just over that seam. Clean that off, and that is near perfect on the sides. Just going to get the ganache to slide back from the edge. So just little strokes like that. And that is a super, super clean finish on a ganache cake. And I want one last one around it. I know that this is probably getting boring, but this is the level of detail you need to go to get those sharp edges. And that is it. So those little tiny bumpy bits, I'll clean up with a razor blade later. Actually, I'll just nip that one back. No, I should have just left it till it's set. But that's all right. So that's a really sharp edge on a cake. I can just let that set up in the fridge, or on a cooler night that will set up at room temperature. And that is a nice, sharp, clean cake. You can cover that with fondant if you want, but you can see the colored ganache. It's a really good replacement for fondant, and if you make it firm enough so that it sets up firm, it will actually set so that it's dry to the touch. And you can take that in and out of a fridge. You don't have any of the problems that you have with fondant. It will still bubble if your cake is super cold and then you take it into a warm room. Just the gases expanding in the cake will like form little bubbles, so you just want to have a little hole where the decoration goes through, or like a few little tiny holes in the cake in general, just to let gases out. And that goes for any kind of icing covering. Anyway, that's enough of me waffling on at you. That is my ganached cake. And yeah, any questions or suggestions, let me know. You can, of course, do the other option just before I close up. So the other way that you can do this is cover one of these with cling film, put it on the top as a lid, just use your scraper around both sides. So you line it up right, just run your scraper around, you get a really sharp finish, let it set up, lift the lid off, peel your cling film off, and then just tidy up the top. That works really nicely. You can also do the inversion method, which is pretty much the same thing, but you just flip the cake over. This for me is just easier, less fuss. It is a little bit fiddly, but this is the way that I like to do it. And I end up with quite a nice finish on it. So thank you. Bye. I need to wash my hands.